listen. I wish you'd listen.
Walk through walk.
You what makes y'all say.
Walk through walk.
It's that folk back then would travel great distances to secure a future of positive instances. And though the journey was filled with danger, keeping faith in what's unseen to my people is no stranger. Did I mention all the miles that they covered in search of their hopes and dreams to discover? Seeking a life free of grueling labor and an opportunity to taste the city flavor. The way that it moved people out from the sharecropper life of the South. The fact that without Jim Crow, hope and progress had a chance to grow.
To the next episode of our show, Bronzeville Trail, Recapturing and Making History. So one of the most exciting things about working on this project is all the history that I'm learning and all the people from the descendants of people who've been important in history that we're connecting with. So, for example, Robert Abbott, who was the founder of the Defender, who was the one who kind of spurred on the migration, his granddaughter or a descendant of his is on our board. Her name is Maïdi Singstak. And then for Ida B. Wells, and we know like the importance of Ida B. Wells to the history of Chicago, her descendants, Ben and Michelle Duster, are active supporters of our trail project. And today we are blessed with the opportunity to speak with the great-grandson of Oscar Stanton DePriest, who was one of the most important political figures in the history, not only of Chicago, but of the country at a time when it was most difficult and dangerous to be part of any movement. So y'all get strapped in. It's time for a history lesson. And before I even get started, I know we're gonna run out of time. So I wanted to say that if you YouTube Philip DePriest, highlights of the career of Oscar DePriest, that's Philip DePriest, highlights of the career of Oscar DePriest, you will find a number of YouTube videos that kind of give even more history than we'll be able to get to today. So welcome, Philip. So Imani's gonna show the first picture because we met at a fundraising event, an event where we were honoring Pat Dow with the Oscar DePriest Award. That's one of my favorite Bronzeville Trail images, and I never knew your great-grandfather's story. I, of course, heard his name as a little girl growing up in Hyde Park, but I never knew the story because he was no longer living when it was time for me to vote and do all those things. So the fact that you're here to give us some background, to tell us about all the things that you've learned as his great-grandson, I'm so excited. So Philip, share just a little bit about your background with us and what's some of the key areas of study and how your areas of study, like in college, actually have spurred you on in this work.
Well, first of all, thanks for having me.
Welcome.
It's a pleasure to be here. Background of myself, born at Providence Hospital.
Wow.
51st and King. I was a military brat. My father was an Army surgeon, and that would be Oscar Stanton DePriest III. And we moved to Germany for a few years, then moved back to the States. He finished his surgical residency at Mass General Hospital in Boston, bought a house for my mother, my brother and myself, and we always came back and forth to Chicago every year.
Mm-hmm.
They were all like two separate camps of my family. Mother's family, and then my father's family. Parents got divorced. There was some animosity between the two camps. So I didn't get to spend a whole lot of time with my grandfather and my grandmother until I was older, when I didn't have to take, any more instructions or obey them anymore. I could do what I wanted at that point.
Right.
When I got into college, so I reestablished my relationship with my grandfather. And that's when I really started to get to know about my great-grandfather, the stories that he would tell. He'd had a stroke, but he was in and out. When he was in, the stories would just start to come out. So that piqued my interest. In college, I had three majors: political science, history, and English. So I am a very passionate historian, and particularly when it comes to African American history.
Yes.
So when my grandfather passed away. My grandmother passed away after that. I became the administrator for the estate.
And we can show a picture of Oscar Stanton DePriest because he looks so stately. and as you, that is a beautiful picture. As you became the administrator of your great-grandfather's stuff, you told me this story about going to the office that he had on King Drive and like having to break the locks. And so what happened with that and what did you find there?
No, that picture was taken on the steps of the Capitol building in Washington.
Wow.
Okay, when I became administrator for the estate, 4538 King Drive has a residential part of the building, and then on the north side there's an extension out that was built for commercial use.
Okay.
So his political office was in there. In the back there was a beauty salon, or the remnants of a beauty salon that had been there for years. So when I first got into his political office, the wall calendar on the wall was March of 1951.
Oh, wow.
And that's the month he passed away.
Wow.
So I got into his office, and I was looking around. There'd been some damage in there from a leak that had been going on for 35 years. So there was some damage in the roof. So I got behind his desk, and I realized that it was all locked up. There were no keys to be found. So I took it upon myself to take a crowbar and pop open the desk. And inside the middle drawer, there was a latch that you could release that opened up the drawers on the right-hand side. And it was a time capsule, a veritable time capsule. Hadn't been opened since the day he died.
Wow.
I actually found the business ledger in the desk. They were very, very meticulous about cash in, cash out. And he had taken out $5 a couple of days before he died and recorded that
in the ledger.
Wow.
And so Imani has some images to share with us of different letters. Look at your great-grandparents. It's so beautiful. So beautiful. But he was like a trailblazer. They were trailblazers in so many ways, achieving a lot of firsts. And I think now when we think of firsts, we don't realize the historical impact like at that time.
Oh, sure.
So like being the first to do, being the first, like that's some big footsteps to create for us to stand in. What were some of the first? I know he was the first African-American Cook County Commissioner, and that was in 1904. Imagine that, 1904. He was 33 years old.
Yeah. So he was a pioneer, trailblazer, if you want to call him. Opened a lot of doors. 1904 was Cook County Commissioner. Never had there been an African-American Cook County Commissioner, ever. Then in 1915, he was elected to the City Council from the 2nd District in Chicago. Served out the majority of his term, and then got involved in a scandal on the South Side. He was accused of helping owners of betting organizations. So he resigned towards the end of his term.
Okay.
And he hired Clarence Darrow.
Wow, his attorney.
To be his attorney. You know, Scopes trial,
Right.
that Clarence Darrow.
That Clarence Darrow.
Hired Clarence Darrow, and Clarence Darrow got him off.
Wow.
Yeah, so.
Wow. Wow. Okay, so I also learned from you and from your videos that I listened to that after Reconstruction, and during Reconstruction, there were a number of African Americans from the South who were in Congress, but for 28 years, there weren't any.
That's correct.
Until your great-grandfather was elected.
What happened was Representative Martin Madden passed away in 1928.
Okay.
And then Mayor Thompson, Big Bill Thompson, recognizing the power that Oscar DePriest wielded on the South Side, recognized as a politician that this man controls a huge voting bloc.
And they needed our votes.
And they needed those votes. You know, it is Chicago, so
It is Chicago,
you know,
yes.
they recognized where the power is.
Yes.
And he appointed Oscar DePriest, and he turned around and won the election in 1928, becoming not only the first African-American member of Congress in 28 years of
yeah.
Reconstruction, but the first African-American congressman ever from a northern state.
States. Now that
Ever.
is impressive.
Yeah.
That's impressive. And the thing is, like, it's hard to imagine what life was like, especially being born in 1871 in Alabama. And you told me about some experiences he had as a young man, recounting some of those challenges and what he witnessed.
Yeah, I mean, my great-grandfather, his father was Neander DePriest. His wife was Martha. She was a seamstress. Neander ran a hauling business where he had, you know, big buckboards and draft horses, and he would haul stuff around. That's when he became a member of the Teamsters.
Okay.
Got involved in politics. This is post-Civil War Reconstruction now.
Wow.
So, yeah. Got involved in politics, befriended some African-American politicians in Alabama. One in particular, James T. Rapier, who was a congressman from Alabama. Now, the pushback, to say the least, was horrendous and lethal between, you know, the KKK and just the amount of white people in Alabama who wanted no part of seeing black people in any position of power or influence.
Yes.
So there was an occasion where Neander actually sheltered James Rapier in his house from a lynch mob and was able to protect him, but unfortunately one of the neighbors fell victim to the lynch mob, and they murdered him and riddled him with bullets. My great-grandfather found, he's 7 years old, found the body the next day on the property. So I think that had a profound effect on him for the remainder of his life, in that he did whatever he could to protect other African Americans.
And advocate for them. So we have some letters, Imani, that show how, even though he was who he was, he advocated for people. I looked at one of them and it was like written to the police and saying, like, could you leave this man alone and let him run his business? Like he advocated for the little man. Like,
that's right.
And that's unheard of. I wish we had more politicians today.
You know, this is the true definition of a grassroots politician, where it could be a guy who ran a shoe shine stand in an alley.
Yes.
To governors of other states.
Yes.
He wrote thousands of letters of recommendation. When I got into his office, there were probably 5 or 6 banker's boxes full of letters between him and other politicians, letters of recommendation that he had written. He was very meticulous in that if you sent a letter out and got a response, he would have them paper clipped together.
Wow.
And I'm sure he instructed his secretaries to do that. Yeah. But there were hundreds and hundreds of them. By the time I came across these boxes of letters and correspondence and photographs. My grandmother had already donated about a dozen boxes to the Chicago Historical Society, which is now the Chicago Historical Museum.
Right.
Archie Motley was a curator down there.
Wow.
And Archie and I became very close after that, because the legal process had not been completed yet, so I carried through and signed off on all the donations.
Can people still go down to see those there?
Oh, yeah.
That's amazing. And one of the images that Imani showed, I didn't say, but John Adams, our executive director, was going through some things in his, I think, some relative's home, and during the pandemic, he had nothing to do and he was going through papers. He found a handwritten notice.
That's right.
That was the one that we
Yeah.
used when we were giving Pat Dow the award. It's like that. It's so, because it's handwritten. We think now sending emails and doing everything quickly. And the other thing that John pointed out to me is he had a female. I can't remember what her position name was, but it was some position that women did not hold. So your great grandfather was progressive in so many ways.
He was. He really was.
Yeah.
He advocated for African Americans in a way that no other African American politician had. I mean, due to the position he was in, there was no other African American politician in the history of the country that was in the same position he was. Because when he was elected to Congress, he was the only person of color
In that
the
Congress.
entire 6 years he was in
And you know what
Congress.
else? It was in some of your videos, but I also saw some of the legislation that he brought forward.
Oh, yeah.
Now, knowing that, number one, people are going to hate you when you bring this forward. Number two, it probably never will pass. It was anti-lynching. It was advocating for better education. Like, it was all kinds of things. Like, he wasn't scared to use his voice.
No, he wasn't. And keep in mind, this is 1929 when he was sworn in.
Right.
And even on the day he was sworn in, there was a huge upheaval from the Southern, as you call them, the Southern Bourbon Democrats, about him even getting sworn in the first place. So what happened was, I'll be brief about this, Ruth McCormick, who was also a newly elected congresswoman from Illinois, she was very good friends with Alice Roosevelt Longworth, whose husband was a Speaker of the House. And that was Nicholas Longworth from Ohio.
Okay.
So she made him aware of the situation. And he was aware also, but she kind of reinforced his awareness and the potential consequences of these Southern Democrats trying to derail Oscar DePriest being sworn in to Congress. So what Longworth did was he had all the newly elected congressmen and women stand up at the same time.
Oh,
and
so it wasn't one at a time.
Swore them in as
unison.
a group.
Oh,
Yeah.
my goodness. That's
So
outstanding.
he bypassed that whole controversy.
That is outstanding.
Isn't it?
Okay, so
Anyway.
all of this history. Okay, so I want to talk to you a little bit, or have you talk to us about something I also didn't know until I spoke to you a couple of weeks ago, the White House Tea Party incident. So we have a picture of your great-grandmother dressed to the nines,
Oh, I love that picture.
going to this party. And
That was a day of the Tea Party.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, just dressed up. What was the controversy about them being allowed there?
Well, Lou Hoover, the First Lady, had arranged for a tea party for all of the newly elected members of Congress.
Okay.
And, this is 1929, so she was acutely aware of the racial environment in this country. But D.C. is a southern town. So what she did was she divided up all of the wives into 4 groups.
Okay.
And she personally vetted the 4th group that included my great-grandmother and the women in it to make sure that they were not, these
Those
vicious,
kind. Yes.
racist,
Yes.
anti-black people.
Right.
So she avoided having to deal with that. So after having vetted all these women, to make sure that they were okay in the presence of an African American woman, she held the tea. And it went very well. My great-grandmother said that Hoover was very gracious, and she enjoyed the day, and that was it. But the backlash was unbelievable across the country. I mean, 2 state legislators passed resolutions condemning Mrs. Hoover and the White House for allowing a black woman into the White House. I mean, I can't even repeat
I know.
what
Some of the
a
things
lot
were
of these letters contain. I have copies of a lot of the letters that were written to the White House to both the president and the first lady. But keep in mind, this is, D.C. is a southern town, overtly hostile, racist environment. And to think of my great-grandfather, every single day he got up, knowing the kind of racist headwinds he was going to face day in and day out, every single day
But
for
going about
6
his
years,
business.
but still went out there and did the best he could and fought the best fight he could. I mean, the amount of courage this man must possess is mind-blowing. I can't get my head around it.
Right.
I mean, we've all had rough days. We've all dealt with racist situations, and it can be very debilitating and draining and hurtful.
To know that you went through that every single day.
Yeah.
Though, like,
Can you imagine that?
no.
I don't know how he did it. I would have snapped,
Yes,
but he did it.
he did it.
And his main objective was to lower the playing field for African Americans in this country. That was his primary goal, was level the playing field, and we'll take it from there.
So what, from his life story and all the things that we've discussed and you've learned, are some of the things, like given our political climate at this time, what lessons can we draw from his legacy?
It's hard to not sound like an old fart, but there's a generation gap here in regards to what people are what their passions are, what they're really into. I'm sure there's a lot of people out there who are passionate historians, passionate about African American history. But unfortunately, in this social media world, more people are more concerned with playing on their phones
Than learning about our history.
than learning about history.
Because the conversations you and I had just getting ready for this conversation and the things that I've learned about him since I started digging into it, and the work that we've done with the History Symposium and all the things that we've done with the Bronzeville Trail project have changed the way I look at everything. I just wish that there was a way for us to bring young people on to say, we got to learn more about our history. Well, we would act differently if we knew more about the
absolutely.
life of people like your great-grandfather.
And I say this from the bottom of my heart, every African American politician from my great-grandfather on stands on his shoulders.
They do.
Every one of them.
They do. And there's so many. Now we take it for granted a little bit, but it still has to be hard in Congress to be in the minority group and be working towards legislation that is so many people are opposed to. But
well, we're so divided now.
Yes. I think that I really want people to go on YouTube, look for those videos, and just listen to a couple of them. Philip talked for 3 hours, so they had to break it up into segments. So it's not that bad. It's like little 6-7 minute segments, but listen to them. Listen to what his great-grandfather did. Listen to the story of how what he was able to find in those artifacts. And I'm going to have Philip back because we got so much more to talk about. But I just want to thank everybody for being with us today, for going on this history ride with me and Philip DePriest. And thank you.
Well, are we out of time?
We're out of time. Thank you for all the work that you've done and that your great-grandfather did.
Well, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure being here.